Our speaker this afternoon is a very good friend of ours. He was formerly the chairman of Swansea Mythtery, and he was the Wales representative on the executive of the Third Age Trust. He lives sometimes in the year, many months in the year, in Greece, in an island of Greece. And he has done a lot of travelling and met a lot of people and has seen many of the places which are in Greek myths. He's an excellent speaker, I've heard him. He's a good friend of mine, and I hope I'm a good friend of his. And I wish you now to warmly, in your usual way, welcome Anthony Hughes.
Can I thank you all for inviting me here? In Wales, Porthcawl is recognised as one of the thought leaders, if you like. And I thought you'd like to know that that's also recognised in the National Executive Committee. This was working it before. So, your reputation goes before you. Let me just also say that I'm not an expert in Greek mythology. I should be an expert in computers, however. Great. What I've found, as I live sometimes in Greece, I go to different places and I hear about the same people. Different stories, and then I go back and I read up about them, and there's 3 or 4 different versions of the same story. And the reason I'm saying this now is if you know all about Jason and the Argonauts and you disagree with me, it's because it came from a different source. That's my start point. I've also given a talk on Delphi to Swansea, and this lady came up to me afterwards and she said, I really enjoyed that. She said, I said, thank you very much. I said, but she said, you missed a 0 off one of those dates. And this is U3A, isn't it? Everybody knows more than you. Anyway. So, hence the title, Magical Mythtery Tour. That's where I live. For 3 or 4 months of the year, and so I thought I'd start off with that, because my stories are based around things I've read about or seen or touched around there. And to get there, we drive down to Ancona in Italy, spend a couple of nights in Verona, a couple of nights with my kids in Switzerland, and then we catch a ferry to a place called the Hughes. And if you've ever seen these ferries, they're fantastic. 11, 12 stories high, and the organisation is chaos, absolute chaos. How they ever get everybody on, I have no idea. I did some work for Romania, and the Italians there, they drive me nuts. They absolutely drive me nuts. They're all over the place. And somebody said, well, what's it like doing business with the Greeks? He said, well, it's like the Italians are not so organised. And that's what the ferries are like. Anyway, from the Gumenica, the first stop I'm going to take you to is Verona. I sometimes call it Verona, I sometimes call it Verdona. It depends who I'm talking to, so if my pronunciation changes, please forgive me. But just below that, that's where Mark Antony lost his sea battle. And when I watched the film, when I was growing up, I always thought it was in Egypt. I didn't realise it was in Greece. So it just puts these places into perspective. Verdona, has anybody heard of it?
Yes.
It's the earliest Greek chronicle. 2,000 years of influence. Can you imagine? We're now in 2000 something or other. This was going for longer than that. This was the site of the earliest Greek oracle. And it was chosen, and there's a lot of stories in Greek, the oracles. They tend to involve birds. either with Delphi, with Zeus setting the eagles free, and they fly around, and where they meet, that's the center of the earth, and that was where Delphi is. In this case, some people say it was some crows, and they were in the trees, and they were able to talk to people. The more likely story is that people were brought there from, I think, Libya, and there was already a custom of the oracles out in Libya. And these two ladies who were sort of kidnapped, they had a different way of talking, a little bit more high-pitched, and hence the interpretation of the birds talking to each other. Anyway, this was dedicated to Zeus, and I found that on one of the tourist brochures. The Donna is making people feel better, and that's what they've done for 1,000 years. And when you go to these places, you feel good. When you walk around, they've chosen these places. It's almost spiritual. I don't mean that in a religious sense, you know. You just feel good when you walk in there. So the oracle, it was dedicated to Zeus, whereas Delphi was dedicated to Apollo. I do another talk on Delphi, so I'm not going to go into Delphi at all today. And his wife. And the original priestesses there were called the Selli. They went barefoot, never washed their feet. I don't know why. I've looked up and I can't find out why. Oops. This is what was happening before. Could somebody stand there and tap a foot for me? And like all oracles, they receive their messages in particular ways, and then they interpret them. These had their message from the rustling of the oak trees, of the leaves. So the tree, and this is important to the story which comes later on, is central to the cult. And those Selli were eventually called the Sellenes. Some people then call them Hellenes, some Helen, and Aristotle, as I've said there, that's the first time that the Greeks are called Hellas. The first time they were sort of brought together as a country was more in Delphi, but this is where they think the word Hellas comes from. And whenever you go to these places, they're in fantastic scenery. If you've been to Delphi, if you've been to Epidaurus, just look at that. You can stand there and you've just got this wonderful scenery in the mountains behind you. And they've got various temples there. This one's to Heracles. And in that, you can see the oak tree there. So that's what it looked like 3rd century BC. That's what's there now. There's still an oak tree there. I can't guarantee it's the same one, but it's still there. And that's what it would have looked like some time ago. And if you walk around all these temples, this one's actually quite small. And I was reading a book, I forget what it's called now, Nicholas Cage's daughter. He wrote a book on Eleni. Have you ever read that? His daughter was writing a book about this area. And she went to Dodona. And she was saying the same, roughly the same as me. It's a wonderful, peaceful place. It's lovely. And she can imagine people going there and asking for advice. And she saw a bit of paper, roughly in where that was, which said, "Will Hearts win the cup?" I don't know if she got an answer. I don't know. She probably listened to the leaves and interpreted it in her own way, but there we go. So it still had an influence in the early 2000s. Now, various people are reputed to have gone to Dodona. Jason, who I will come to shortly, and again. I didn't even touch it. You know, in Christmas time, can you just say, "Look out behind you," if I don't spot it? Okay? Jason, Odysseus, on his way back from Troy, he went to seek the advice on the oracle of Dodona. How should he approach Ithaca? When he went back home, should he storm in or should he sort of inveigle his way in? And also, so that's in the Odyssey, Achilles sought advice from the Oracle of Dodona. So that's at the time of Homer. So at the time of Homer, they were already talking about, well, they were still talking about the influence of Dodona. Not necessarily as opposed to Delphi, but the fact is, he chose that one as part of the story. And I've got the numbers right. So, from there, what we usually do is we drive across Greece, we go past Mythtery, we look at all the fantastic chapels on top of these wonderful hot hills. But the next place I want to talk about is Volos. However, before I go to Volos, just above it is a place called Dion, which, to be honest, I'd never heard of before last year. And somebody mentioned it to us, so we thought we'd drive up to Dion from Volos. And again, it's got a wonderful view, but it's not site of an oracle. It's an archaeological site, so it doesn't have the same, I'm not saying, it just doesn't have the same feeling about it. That's Mount Olympus in the background. Some of the mosaics there. But the bit I liked was this one, where Alexander had all of these shields dedicated to that particular battle. If you've heard of the story where he was fighting the Persians and they crossed the river and they took him by surprise, this, that and the other. That was dedicated by Alexander. The only thing which doesn't make sense to me is that... Hello? Hello? Sorry. He had already crossed over to Turkey to across that river, so I'm sure he didn't come back just to dedicate that, so I'm not sure the logistics there. So, however, it was dedicated by Alexander. Philip of Macedon also went there. And so when you go through Greece, what I find is, I've heard all of these stories, I've heard them also all over the place, but then to walk in their footsteps, it just feels different. Because you think that because the heroes are mythological, the sites themselves are all almost mythological, you know. Anyway, go back to Volos. That's Volos. So we drive to Volos. It's quite a large town now, as you can see. That's where we stayed, the Volos Palace Hotel. It looks very swish. It's really nice, but it's only about 60 odd euros a day, so if you ever go to Volos, that's a good place to stay. But the important thing with this story is the home of Jason. If you come in via the sea, the first thing you see is that hotel there, Hotel Jason. And you don't think of Jason having a home, really. I don't know. Perhaps you do. And as you know, Jason and the Argonauts, so they made the ship called the Argo in search of the Golden Fleece. And nobody knows really what it was like, but I'm going to draw your attention to that bit there. Can you see it? And also, they rebuilt the Argo just to see if it would work. And then up there, can you see that? The original bit, there was a branch from the oak tree from Dodona. And if you remember what I just said, with the tree in Dodona talking to them, on the prow of the Argo, and I'll come back to this in a minute, they had a bow which Zeus, or whoever it was talking to them through the bow of the ship. And if I had walked past that ship, I wouldn't have understood that there at all, unless I had been to Dodona. A chap called Tim Severin has done lots of journeys, and he actually built his version of the Argo, but there's no branch there. So if he got lost, it's his own fault. However, they rebuilt the Argo, and they actually did this particular journey. And I'm just pulling out a couple of names here. On the Argo, there were so many crew members. I just want to mention 3, because I'm going to be talking about them a little bit later. Heracles. If I say Hercules, I apologize. It's Heracles, Peleus, and Philoctetes. You may not have heard of Philoctetes, but I will explain. I'll tell you why. Out in Greece, I've got a friend there who runs a museum, and he's written a book that thick about these scattered isles, and he's a wonderful historian. So I said to him, look, I'm thinking of doing this talk. What shall I talk about? He said, Philoctetes. Oh, yeah. But this is what happens when you sit down with Greeks. You know, they want to fill your knowledge in the vacuum. They feel sorry for me now. So there's the Argo. And this is the way they went. And there's a problem here in that, you see that dotted line? I'm not sure if you can, just there. In the books, they say that the Argo followed the landmass. And therefore, that makes sense. However, as I've sailed there many, many times, I've got my own little boat, it's easier to follow these islands. Because you can see them. You can see the next island. You can see the next island. You can see the next island. And this is an important point with part of this story, because there's an island there called Chryse in ancient Greek, and apparently this is one of the places where Jason stopped on his way to recover the Golden Fleece. And he was told by the gods, as they often do, to build a sort of a temple there, an altar to Athena. Now, whether he did or not, that's by the by. But nobody knows for sure where that island is. But if it is that island, then they didn't go up that little bit. And I'll come back to that later. However, our next stop is Lemnos. And I'm not going to take you all the way to Colchis, because I'm trying to focus. Hello? Hello? I'm trying to focus on the places I know. Lemnos. Lemnos is an interesting place in many ways. When Jason arrived there weren't any men on the island. And the reason was the ladies of the island forgot to praise Aphrodite. And so she endowed them with this foul stench. And as a result, the men went off to Thrace, had all of these concubines or slaves, depending on... and this is typical of Greek mythology. They came back with all of these women anyway. So the wives promptly killed them all. So when Jason got there, they were obviously more fragrant by that time. And Jason had a child with the queen. And eventually Heracles said, oh, look, we've got something to do. We're supposed to be looking at this golden fleece. And Heracles was looking after the ship in the harbour, which is surprising given all the ladies there, because his later life, he had many lady friends, but he was here at this point in time just looking after the ship. And then he said, it was after 18 months, 2 years or something like that. Look guys, we've got to get going, we've got something to do, and off they went. I'll go back. More of Lemnos later. So, off they went, found the Golden Fleece, as you know, and there was a problem in that they had to escape. The king's daughter Medea was probably the most evil woman you can ever imagine in any genre ever. She was a sorceress, but she was struck by one of the gods, which made her fall in love with Jason. So she fell in love with Jason. She helped him escape, And as you can imagine, having taken the Golden Fleece, and they were on their way back, and the father, the king, wasn't very happy about this. So various things happened. One was, she actually had her brother with her. And as they were being chased by father's fleet, in order to stop the fleet catching them up, she cut her brother up into little pieces, chucked it over in the sea. So the pursuing fleet had to stop and pick up the odd arm here, leg over there. But at that point in time, you know, everybody wanted to find the Argo. So they couldn't go back the way they came, across the open sea, so they had to go through various backwaters, and the way they did it was through the Talking Crown. That branch, which had come from Vavona, and was a talking leaf, that was able to talk them through all the back, not the back roads, but the back streams, the back rivers, so they were able to make their escape. The interesting thing, I showed that boat of Tim Severin earlier on. When he went and did his journey, he found in the Caucasus, these guys were using sheepskin, and dragging it in the water to collect pieces of gold. So you can imagine, all those years ago, the golden fleece was probably actually a golden fleece, but it was covered with gold flecks. And this is what I find interesting about all of these things. All of the stories is a bit like King Arthur or Robin Hood or whoever. There's something there somewhere which feels right. And to me, this feels right. So there's Lemnos again. Where they recovered the golden fleece was in Colchis. I just need to check the time. Get it the right way around. There you go. So they went back to Volos, and Jason had to find this golden fleece to satisfy a particular king in Volos. As you can imagine, the king never thought he would come back. When he came back, then there was treachery afoot. So Medea, being Medea, I don't even... she pulled a trick on this guy, and she was able to do various bits of magic. And she had this pot, and she put something in it, and it brought it out, and it was young and rejuvenated. And the third time, she offered it to the king. Of course, the king got in the pot, died. So Jason became temporary king, but the sons wanted to have revenge. So Jason and Medea had to flee Volos, or Yolkis as it was known at the time. And off they went to Corinth. At Corinth, again this is a typical Greek myth, Jason fell in love with somebody else. And he said to Medea words something like, well, you only loved me because you were shot by Eros, and you know, it wasn't real love, it was just love from the gods. And Medea, being Medea, she gave Pars all these kind words and said, okay. So she sent a new wedding dress for Jason's wife, which was a nice thing to do, until she put it on. Because this dress was enchanted, Medea being Medea, and basically she was burnt alive. The whole palace went on fire, and Jason prayed, I think it was to Athena, one of those, to help him escape. And she basically thought, well, why bother? You know, you've been unfaithful, you've been this, you've been that. But then, on the other hand, he had done good things for her, so she helped Jason escape. But before I go to Athens, what happened to Jason? He wasn't a happy man after that, and basically he lived in the Argo. He died in poverty in the Argo, and that was the end of Jason. Medea, on the other hand, being Medea, went to Athens, and she married the king of Athens, King Aegeus. And they had a son, who was obviously going to become the new king of Athens. However, this is my favorite guy, Theseus. I really like Theseus. And if you ever want to read about Theseus, read 2 books by Mary Renaud. If you've read them, they're good, aren't they? Yeah. So Theseus was born in Troezen, which is to the west on the Peloponnese. And basically, Aegeus impregnated, I forget the name of the lady, as did Poseidon, as these things happen in Greek mythology. So he was brought up, and he didn't really know who he was until he was told that there was a big slab, and when he was large enough and big enough and tall enough, he could sort of open this slab. Underneath there was a sword and various other things which showed that he was the rightful heir to King Aegeus in Athens. So when he got that sword, off he went to Athens. Medea crops up again because she recognized him straight away, as a sorceress she would. So she tried to have him killed. And she said to Aegeus words to the effect that this guy is going to usurp your son's throne. And she gave him some poison to give to Theseus. Just as he was about to deliver that poison, he recognized his sword. So Theseus had then to do various things. For example, killing this huge bull in Marathon. And that's roughly the end of Medea, because she was banished, and you don't hear about it unless you go and see some plays about the Medea. But she is a real witch. At the same time, though, the Athenians had upset the Cretans, and what happened was there were games in Athens, and the best guy in the games came from Crete. Some of the Athenians didn't like it. This, that, and the other happened, and the son was killed. So the Greeks then had to satisfy Minos, and every year they used to send various people, every 7 years, the most courageous and the most beautiful girls out to Crete. Theseus didn't want to seem to be above all of this, so they used to have tokens, stone tokens, they used to put in the pot, and a bit like lottery tickets, and his name came out. So he was chosen as one of the people that had to go to Crete. So off went Theseus to Crete, to Knossos, where you'll probably remember the stories about the Minotaur and what have you. Now, Knossos, I find, is a terrific place, because that is one of the earliest civilizations, the Minoans. If you go there, these are the kinds of things which you still see, although some of them have been... just check my voice. Hello? Hello? Hello again? Can you hear me? Oh, yes you can. So, what we see there now, discovered, we have another Greek tragedy coming up here. Discovered in 1878, excavations, etc. And if you read Mary Renault, she doesn't talk about people fighting bulls. She talks about dancing over bulls, leaping over bulls, which that would imply. But of course, leaping over a bull is not the safest of occupations, so a lot of these people used to get killed. I suspect most of them did. The thing about Theseus was he was able to, because he was young, he was nimble, he was strong, he was able to train all of his friends and colleagues, and they got through all of that. That's another one of the... I think, have anyone been to Knossos? It's a lovely place, isn't it? So, that's what it was like. Then comes the story of the Minotaur. As you probably know, Theseus had to go and kill the Minotaur. And Ariadne, the king's daughter, gave him a thread so that he could find his way along the maze. He killed the Minotaur, followed the thread back, and off they went, sailing into the sunset. However, whilst in Knossos, as I say, when you go through these places, you pick up bits of story. Can you remember a film called Ill Met by Moonlight? It's a black and white film, Dirk Bogarde, where they kidnap the German General Kripe. That's the film. And there, it is, that's Patrick Lee Fermer. It's either him or him, I can't see from here. But they kidnapped General Kripe, coming out of Knossos one night. And they kidnapped him, took him right away across the other side of Crete, bundled him on board a ship to Egypt. And the interesting thing about that is, the general wasn't happy being kidnapped with all of these barbarians as he saw them. And he was up in the cave and he was thinking to himself, and he started quoting Horace. Patrick Lee Fermer finished the quotation for him. Something's happening here again. I need to shout. There we go. It works if I shout. So Patrick Lee Fermer finished off that quotation from Horace, and all of a sudden they got on well. And after the war, there's Patrick Lee Fermer, there's General Kripe in Athens, underneath the Parthenon. I had never heard of Patrick Lee Fermer. The Greeks all know him. He's a hero out there. My second wife, my second mother-in-law, who lived underneath the Acropolis, because my wife was, that particular wife was Greek. You can ask me questions later. We went down to Peloponnese, and she said, well, that's where Patrick Lee Fermer lived. And I said, who? And then she mentioned, and then I remembered the film. And then she started to tell me, and I'm thinking of developing a story on Patrick Lee Fermer. You couldn't get somebody like him these days. He decided, he got thrown out of all sorts of schools as a boy, and because his parents were living in India and this and the other, his mother came back to the UK, and he's having been expelled, but he used to read and read and read and read. He knew all the classics. He taught himself ancient Greek. Thank you. So he said one day, I'm going to walk to Constantinople. And unlike other mothers, she said, okay, let's get out a map, and they planned the journey, so off he went. And his stories of how he got there are really good, so I can recommend those. Anyway, that's Knossos. When Theseus and Ariadne left Knossos, they went to Naxos. Naxos is at that point in time, was quite a cultural centre in the Deccanese. it was a trade centre for quite some time. It's not so famous these days. So there they are, Theseus and Ariadne. But it didn't end happily. Because whilst in Naxos, Bacchus came along, as these Greeks do, had an affair with Ariadne. Theseus wasn't happy about this, and just there, as his boat sailing away into the distance, so he dumped Ariadne. So there she was, stuck in Naxos. And then Theseus went back from Naxos to Athens. And if you know any of the story, what happened then was, at Sunion, which, if I just go back, it's right there on the tip of that peninsula. Theseus' father, Aegeus, was waiting for him. And the deal was, hello? Yeah, the deal was, if you come back and you're safe and sound, you have white sails. If you come back and Theseus is dead, black sails. Theseus had also had a couple of parties on the way. He forgot to change the sails, so he was sailing into Sunion with the black sails, forgot to change them. King Aegeus, so mortified was he, that he jumped into the sea. So he killed himself, and that's why the sea is called the Aegean. King Aegeus, the Aegean Sea, named after Theseus' dad. So that's the temple, the temple that you see up there, down here. And other bits of story I pick up, Byron. Byron was a hero to the Greeks, as you probably know. But, just there, he signed his name. Aren't you proud to be a Brit? One of the first guys to go along and say, Byron was here. He also did it in Switzerland. My daughter lives in Switzerland, so we went to Chillon Castle. And there you go, Byron. I wonder how many... If you see this chat in a couple of years' time, I'll have a couple of slides on where Byron has carved his name in various places. The interesting thing about this is, as you can see, there are a couple of pillars missing. And 2 years ago, I saw one of them. This is from the temple in Poseidon. There's a clue there. It was in Venice. Can you imagine? I just imagine some guys on a boat say, hey, I've got a good idea. There's a spare pillar there. Let's take it back to Venice with us. So I will find out why, one day I will find out why it got there. But as I say, on my travels, you just see these odd things and they sort of plant out extra little bits in your story. Right. From Athens, Theseus went to an island called Skyros. Skyros, that's where we live, is across the way there. So we've been to Skyros. It's a lovely island, lovely island. There it is. Now, King Lycomedes did two things. He killed Theseus, and this depends on which story you read. According to Mary Renaud, he didn't kill him at all, but Theseus was so cheesed off with what was happening in Athens, he just jumped off a cliff like his dad did. Other stories say that Lycomedes killed him, because Theseus was a threat. Lycomedes also was the king when, prior to the Trojan War, Thetis, Achilles' mother, didn't want him to go because she had heard what would happen to him. So she hid him in Skyros. There's Achilles Bay, and it's one of these things where, is it just called Achilles Bay because of the tourists, or how long has that been called Achilles Bay? And I've seen really old maps, and it is called Achilles Bay. But whilst I was there, Rupert Brooke. You know, if I should die, think only this of me, that in some foreign field. That's where he's buried. He was on his way to fight in the First World War, had a fever, and his last wish was that he would be buried there. And this is a terrific place because there's not a single signpost there. There's nothing. As you drive along the road, you can pass that quite easily because it's down into this olive grove. No sign, no path, no nothing. And you go down there, and I'm not sure what pictures I've got. No. Around the side is his poem. And it's looked after by the Rupert Brooke Society, but that's all there is there. What you see there, if I was to zoom back, you wouldn't see anything else. You would still see the olive groves, and that's it. And in the town itself, it's got a great big statue to Rupert Brooke. They're not backward in selling themselves in terms of tourism. So that's Skiros. Meanwhile, Ariadne, who we remember we left her in Naxos with Bacchus, she went up to Lemnos. Come on. So there's Bacchus is the German, the Roman, Dionysos is the Greek. And I went to see an opera by Strauss, Ariadne in Naxos. And if you like opera, this was in the Royal Opera House in London. I was a guest of ICL, and the guy who took me there couldn't stand it. So we had to leave half time. So it took me all these years to find out what happened to Ariadne in Naxos. So off she went, up to Lemnos, and she had a couple of sons, two of whom I mentioned, Peparithos and Staphylos. Now, back to the Sporades, which is where all of this started. That's where I live, Alonissos. But the next island I'm going to talk about is Skopelos. There it is. And on Skopelos, there's a place here called Staphylos, which is the name of Ariadne's son. The island was called Peparithos, which is the name of the other son in history. This is a little island just about there. And some time ago, they found this sword. 1936, so it's fairly recent. That sword is from the Cretan culture, Minoan sword. And all of these things, you know, they sort of click. You just pick up little bits of stories. So, Staphylos, Peparithos, the name of ancient Skiros. And I lodge all of these because I do boat tours. So I take people on my boat around here. Part of the reason is that bay there, if you ever watch Mamma Mia, that is in Mamma Mia. And up there, around the other side of the island, is the chapel in the film where they got married in Mamma Mia. So what happens is I take people on my boat, I go snorkeling down here, they swim to the shore, and then they walk, and that is really steep. There are hundreds of steps there. They walk, and they walk, and they walk, up to that chapel up the top, and the view is wonderful. It's a beautiful chapel, and then they go inside, and it's nothing like the film, because that's in Elstree. But they tend not to be disappointed. I don't tell them in advance, because they wouldn't go. And that was, you know, half the thing there is to go up the top, see the view, and come back home and tell you that bugger didn't tell us. Just check the time again. Right, so that's Skopelos, where they shot Mamma Mia. Alonissos. I said that's where I live. And there are a couple of other islands here. Up the top there is a sunken city, well, it's called Sathura. And if you remember, when Jason was going to search for the Golden Fleece, he stopped in this place called Chryse, and he dedicated this altar to Athena. When they were fighting the Trojan War, they were told to find the altar of Athena on the way there, on the way to Troy. And of course, Philoctetes was the only one who had been on both trips, so he was the only one who knew where the altar was. So he took them there, and basically Athena wasn't happy. She wasn't happy that her altar was rediscovered and used for other purposes. So she made Philoctetes. He was bitten by a snake on the foot, and it festered, and it smelt, it stank. His fellow colleagues dumped him. Have a guess where? Lemnos. And they dumped him there, and off they went to fight the war. So they went to fight the war in Troy, and at some stage, a different oracle, and I can't find which oracle, said to them, if you're going to win this war, you need the bows and arrows of Heracles. Philoctetes had actually helped with Heracles' funeral pyre. Heracles became a god. His bow and arrow were bequeathed to Philoctetes. So Odysseus went back to Lemnos to try to persuade Philoctetes to give the bow and arrow so that they can go back and win the battle in Troy. Philoctetes wasn't very happy about this either, until they said that the oracle has said, if you come with us, your foot will be mended. So he had been in Lemnos for however many years, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever years. Poor bloke on his own with a rancid foot. But anyway, so that's the story of Philoctetes. I'm not sure if you've heard that one before, but I haven't. But this historian friend of mine, who's done a lot of work there are actually 2 islands there, you can't see them. The other one, it's a volcanic island. So what's happened is, the middle bit has sunk. And a lot of sponge divers who used to go up there, they don't now, they found this sunken city. And apparently it's a wonderful city, but not many people know about it. Thank goodness it's a long way away, so people don't go there. But from a lot of research that he's done, he believes that city, those islands to be ancient Chryse, where Jason stopped. So that's part of that story. And the book he wrote was Those Scattered Isles. It's on Amazon. It's a really good book. The next island, Odysseus went there. It's the home of the Cyclops. And in Alonissos is a bar called the Cyclops Cave. So I thought what I'd do, because I sail up these places, but a bit like where I live in Gower, which is a protected area, all around here, from halfway across Alonissos all the way around, is protected in the same way, but it's an ocean park, because of the monk seal, which is one of the most threatened seals in Europe. So I went to the Coast Guard, who's a friend, and usually if you talk to friends, you can get around anything in Greece, but this guy, so I said, can I go up to Gura, because I want to take a picture of the cave, because the caves, there is a cave there, where they found bones, and they found this, that and the other, but the bones are of animals. Perhaps Cyclops ate them, I don't know. And he wouldn't let me, because it's protected. Trouble is, when I came back, about 3 weeks after I came back, I found that I read in the paper a lot of refugees have been dumped there. So there's this protected island, and as you can imagine, it gets hot in Greece, 30, 35 degrees. The telephone signal isn't great. They were dumped on the island, given a mobile phone, and say, give us a couple of hours, ring this number, and you will get help. What do you say? What do you say? That's a totally different subject, but before anybody asks me about refugees, I know they went to Ura. Now this island here, Kirapanagia, one of my favourite islands, just there is a lagoon. And you go into this lagoon, switch the engine off, and because it's all protected, you can't hear a single thing. It's absolutely flat calm, and you can just jump in anywhere because it's not cold. But it's like a large swimming pool. It's wonderful. And there's a bay there. I've never ever seen anyone in it. And you can clap and it echoes around. And it's 35, 40 feet of water, and you can count the pebbles on it. It's just wonderful. Refugees were dumped there. On this side, again, 35, 40 degrees. What do you say? The best thing I can say is that they were taken to Olonissos, down to Mythtery here, and the locals were wonderful. They came out with their blankets. All the local tavernas cooked them pasta, and they did everything they could to help the refugees, and then they got shipped off to Athens. What happens then with so many thousands of them is difficult. But the other story I've got is on Peristera here. That is an uninhabited island, mainly uninhabited island. And but we go there for picnics and barbecues and things, and we clean up after us because we're good Brits. And a friend of mine went there, and she found some clothes, a bag, papers, but they weren't the kind of official papers that people would hide to disguise where they came from. These papers were personal recollections, pictures of parents. And it's heartbreaking. You know, this was probably a child, again, dumped on the island. Having said all of that, I've hardly heard any other stories. So I've only heard of them being dumped on 2 places, and I think the ones there probably came that route. Right, Olonissos, this is where I live. Achilles' dad, apparently that was his favourite island. And his name is Peleus. So again, you can imagine Thetis put in Achilles and Skyros just across the way there. Skyros is about the same distances from Gower to Ilfracombe, just to give you a sense of space. And just imagine, if I could draw a line here, that's almost a straight line. So something has fallen through in the middle there, and that is a site of an ancient castle. It's called Castro, Red Castle, red because you can see the colour of the rock there. And if Achilles' dad was real, if he went to that island, that's where he would have been. And apparently it's his last resting place. The doubt about that is, Greeks, like the Welsh, if there's somebody famous there, they embrace them. There's no sign anywhere which said, our Achilles' dad, you know, he died here. But that is the story, and there have been lots of, in the middle here, remnants of pottery, things like that, those eras. If you're wondering where I live, that's where it is. That's the closest I could get to a red dragon. So I put that on the gate, and the interesting thing about that is, you can't see it, the name of the house is Tigwalia. And Greeks understand that more than English people do, because Wales in Greek is Gwalia, so I say Gwalia. A house is Spiti, so Spiti Gwalia. And I say Tiguanian, they understand. So a taxi home is either to the house with the red dragon, I know it's not a dragon, but that's by the by, or to Tiguanian, the taxi drivers know it. That's, as you go up there, you up all these stairs and more stairs and more stairs, and then you sit on the roof and you look out if you've still got breath. And that's it. Adil, let's goodbye and thank you. One thing I will say about this, I cheated here because as you can see I'm getting portly. I don't look so bad there, and that's because on Photoshop I found a way of sucking in my belly. I don't usually tell, so that's my little boat. And anyway, so thank you very, very much for listening. Thank you for your time. Thanks for inviting me.
Now then, are there any questions or comments you'd like to make? Thank you, Lawrence. Well, you heard me then, didn't you? I didn't have to use this. Are there any questions? John?
Lawrence, shall I just use that? Thank you.
First of all, many thanks for reviving those wonderful stories. I think so many of us remember them, those marvellous names, Achilles and Theseus, and absolutely wonderful to hear them. I still wonder, just as we all do about, and you touched on it, King Arthur and Robin Hood and the stories here, is there any conviction amongst the people out there that they do bear some resemblance to actual people? Or is it totally divorced from any reality? Is it just something wonderful in our minds that we hold on to?
In my view, there were heroes. Just imagine this is 3,500 years ago, okay? And somebody somewhere, because of the restless nature of the human spirit, somebody with all that beautiful sea will want to experiment. Somebody will want to go searching. And some of these guys would be big. Some of them will be heroic. Some of them will be majestic leaders. And I don't think it's too far a step to go from that basic to a lot of the stories. What I find wonderful with the Greek stories is the richness. If you ever start looking into it, I've just scratched the surface here. If you go into all of the detail, it's fantastic. And the logic, and the gods, and this, that, and the other, and how they dealt with each other. And there's a lot of stories about, again, the human spirit. So I believe that there were such people as Odysseus. I do believe that. Whether it was Odysseus, whether it was Theseus, but in these days where you start to move between this village and this village, and then you can go from that place to that island, to that group of islands. This is the nature of man, isn't it? We explore things. And when we get there, the best of these people don't go in and kill anybody. They go in, make friends, they win them over. And a lot of these stories are like that until you come to Troy and Trojan War. We know there was something like the Trojan War because of archaeological evidence. What we don't know is Achilles, we don't know Hector, we don't know Helen. But there is so much detail and majesty in these myths. I actually believe that there is a lot of truth to them. 3,500, 4,000 years ago, who knows? You know, Homer started writing whenever, 750 BC, and it was already spoken of by then, so there's no proof. But I believe a lot of the heart of it is there.
Any other questions? Anthony, you have left them speechless.
Thank you very much.